Thank you, everybody, and welcome to the webinar answering the question, what's it like to be a person of color in an independent school? We have 3 colleagues who currently work within the independent school community in the New York area, and they will be speaking about their own experiences, certainly not representing the voices of anyone else other than themselves. We have another panel like this offered late in a few weeks, where we'll have 3 different panelists who will share their experiences. So we invite you, if you're interested, to certainly consider viewing that one or joining us for that one. My name is Liz Fernandez. I'm the NYSAIS Job Fair Administrator. This February will be my 21st year in this role, and I'm delighted to be part of the team at NYSAIS that hosts the job fair to promote diversity in its 32nd year, designed to increase the number of teachers and administrators of color within the independent school community. There are nearly 200 NYSAIS schools throughout New York State, and in New York City alone, there are well over 100. Many different kinds of schools serving some of the sweetest, kindest, most intellectually curious young people in and around New York. The NYSAIS Job Fair to promote diversity will be held on Saturday, February 20th, 2021, from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. virtually. And you will have an opportunity to both register, if you haven't already, for that event, and certainly between now and then, ask any question that might be important for you by emailing jobfair@nysais.org. NYSAIS stands for New York State Association Independent Schools. So once again, thank you this evening. Thank you for joining us this evening. And I'm excited to have my friends who are serving as panelists speak and answer some questions and be in conversation with each other and with all of you. I will ask Jesse to please introduce himself first, and then Rebecca, and then Joal.
Sure. Thank you, Liz. Just want to thank you for the opportunity to being here and speaking. So my name is Jesse Montero. I'm an independent school teacher. I work at a school called the Allen Stevenson School. It is a K through 8 school, and I'm a head teacher in kindergarten. This is my 10th year working at Allen Stevenson, and I've really enjoyed my experience so far. Allen Stevenson is an all-boys school that is K through 8, and it has been in existence for over 130 years. So there's a lot of years and experience that goes into the school, and I'm happy to here to talk and to share my experience in any way possible, and just help anyone along the lines of finding employment at an independent school.
Thank you, Jesse. I'm also really happy to be here. This is one of the events I look forward to during the year the most. And thank you, Liz, and Andrew, for hosting, and Liz for all your work in mounting this job fair. It means a lot to me. I am at the Spence School, which is on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. It's a K-12 girls' school. Has also a long history, been in existence for about 130 years at this point. And I've been there for 4 years as the director of institutional equity. And before that, I was in California independent schools and have been in independent schools for the last 20 years of my career. So.
Everyone, thank you for having me. It's great to be here. My name is Yuval Ortiz Quiroga, and I'm Director of Diversity and Institutional Equity at St. Anne's School, which, in spite of its name, is not a religious school. We're located in Brooklyn Heights. It's a pre-K through 12 school of about 1,100 students, 400 employees. It's a large school, and it's co-ed, and it's relatively new compared to other independent schools in New York City. Is about 55 years old. And we'll talk more about our settings. But this is my 5th year at St. Anne's and my 19th year in independent schools. So I'm happy to share more as the evening goes on. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. One thing I neglected to mention at the beginning is, for those of you that have joined us live, Camera on, camera off, it is up to you. There is no preference. We invite you, we just recognize that it's being recorded. And so that's something that we wanted to be upfront about. We also have one more panelist who is joining any minute. And as soon as he is able to join, then I will certainly have him introduce himself and just, fold him right in. I would love to start with Yuval to speak to your experience. What's been your experience with independent schools? What types of schools should candidates be aware of in terms of what's available out there? You all have introduced yourselves and given a little bit of information about schools, but can you go a little bit deeper?
Sure, I'm happy to do that. Hi, Dwight. There are, as Liz mentioned at the beginning, there's about 200 schools in New York State and many more in the country. I think independent schools is sort of a weird amalgamation because they're so different. There are schools that are for single sex, there are schools for multi-gender co-ed schools, there are boarding schools, there are schools that are within the NYSAIS that are just for early childhood, there are schools that are K through 8, pre-K through 12, there are boarding that are just high school, and schools tend to be really, really, really different from each other. And sometimes you go on websites and the mission statements and things like that look very similar to each other, but actually, especially when you visit and you spend some time in them, they have very different work environments. If you read between the lines often in websites, you can tell a lot about a school's values and what they emphasize, which has an impact on what it's like to work there, really. In terms of demographics, schools also vary a lot. Some schools are really diverse, just to be blunt, and some other schools are not, and that makes a big difference, especially given the context of our talk tonight. I think schools vary a lot also in terms of, or as I was saying, in terms of what they emphasize, their educational missions vary a lot. Some schools are progressive, and it's a big distinction when we talk about schools that are progressive and schools that are more traditional, and that has an impact in what you would be expected to do when you work there, especially if you're a teacher. What you're expected to focus on, the kind of pedagogy that you'll be expected to implement with students. The label progressive can also be a bit of a sort of Rorschach almost, like lots of people mean very different things by that. So I think it's important in your job search to interrogate a little bit, like what does this school mean when they say progressive, or what does this other school mean when they say progressive? I think for me, I started working at a boarding school before I moved to the city, and then I worked at a Quaker school, which is another dimension. There are private schools that are independent schools that are religious or have a religious affiliation. There are several Quaker, there are others, and that also has an impact on the pedagogy and the culture of the school. Then I came to St. Anne's, where it's sort of, and I'll elucidate a little bit about the progressive. We're most known for not giving grades at any level, which people associate with being progressive, but there are many aspects of the school that are not exactly progressive in a traditional way, like early 20th century progressive education. And other schools have more alignment with that sort of educational philosophy. So as I said, it's important to sort of ask what does a school mean when they say progressive, or when a school has a reputation of being progressive, how does that line up with what happens in the school? I'll stop there so that other folks can add their perspective too.
Thanks, Yuval. Rebecca, anything you'd like to add?
Do we want to take a moment?
I've got him queued up.
You've got him queued.
Yep,
okay.
We're good.
So I would just add. I mean, I think Yuval, you covered a lot of really the important key points. I think the only thing I would add is that a huge part of driving force for independent schools, which is in common with all independent schools, is that they're mission based, and so and that they're board driven. And so because of that, really looking at the mission, like you said, and then understanding how it's interpreted, because a lot of the missions can look alike. and then really understanding what that means, and in your discussions with folks on in an interview process, really asking people what they mean by the mission and getting that sense of how it manifests is a great way to start to suss out what those cultural differences you were talking about really are. So
Yeah, I
True.
mean,
Go ahead, Jesse.
in this whole process, I mean, both Rebecca and Yuval, you've said so much, and what I would add is just I mean, I think Yuval kind of mentioned it. You get a real sense of what the the independent school's mission is once you get a chance to talk to the individuals that work there, especially the people of color. And also you get a chance to feel the energy once you step into that room, into that building. So you get a sense really quickly if that mission is really lined up with what they're actually putting out into the world. So I just there's a variety of schools out there, boarding, single sex. I'm at a single sex school, all boys. So there's a wide variety of different independent schools out there.
And I thank you, everyone. I would also say that as we think about schools, you know, in New York City, there's certainly a concentration. New York City, Westchester, Long Island are the majority of our member schools in New York State. This year's job fair will have incredible representation from those regions, and as always, we'll also draw from New Jersey, Massachusetts, Connecticut, and points north of Westchester. And so we invite people to consider any and all potential opportunities in any of those areas, because there are some really unique and wonderful schools and some great opportunities that exist outside of the immediate community that you may be living within. I want to take this moment to transition us to the next question and start with asking Dwight to introduce himself. Dwight, everyone mentioned where they currently work, the role that they're in, how long they've been in schools, and to speak a little bit about the kind of school that you're in, because in this particular moment, your school is different than some of the other schools where our panelists work. I also want to note that the question for everybody to respond to is, what's been your professional journey? What made you consider independent schools, in particular professionally? Did you always start in independent schools? Did you make a transition? So tell our audience a little bit about your own professional journey. And in the process, Dwight, please introduce yourself. So Dwight, you'll go first. I'm going to ask Yuval to go second, Jesse to go third, and Rebecca to go fourth.
All right, awesome. Hello and good evening, everyone. So good to see you all. So my name is Dwight Vidal. I use he, him pronouns, and I am the Director of Institutional Equity and Belonging at the Collegiate School. This is my first year at the Collegiate School. Previously, I spent 12 years at Riverdale Country School. So 13 years altogether in independent schools, and I started in public schools. So the way I got into education was I started through Teach for America. So I started in Houston, Texas, and I taught public school for 3 years, teaching grades 9 through 11, really, English, which is what I'm trained to teach. And then I decided to move back to New York City. And funny story, I went to Riverdale Country School. So I actually rejoined my alma mater. And my mom, on the day that I graduated from Riverdale, said to me, you know, you're going to come back here one day. You're going to come back and work. And I was like, absolutely not. I did my time. I'm ready to go. And sure enough, I found my way back to Riverdale. And it was a great home for me for many, many years. Currently, I'm at the Collegiate School, where I am the Director of Institutional Equity and Belonging. Collegiate is an all-boys school, or as one of our trans students refers to it, a mostly all-boys school. And that is something that's very interesting to think about, single-sex spaces and transgender identity, and how those two intersect. I am new to this role, but new to the role at Collegiate, but I was doing very similar work at Riverdale for many years. And I am thankful to be here with you all. Again, my professional journey really started through Teach for America. I joined Teach for America because I needed a job after I graduated from college. And I really thought that giving back to my community would have been really helpful. And I did that for 3 years in Houston, Texas, had a great time, learned quite a bit. I'll tell anyone that I think that public schools really are on the cutting edge of pedagogy in terms of some of the work that I was doing there. And then independent schools are different. Independent schools really rely on the teachers to kind of like take the lead in many ways in terms of their own professional development and even their classroom. So you have greater, I guess, influence in your classroom and not always the same kind of support or professional development opportunities that presented themselves in public school, at least through my experience. Yeah, and that's my journey. And now I'm here at Collegiate.
Thanks, Dwight.
Um, Mine, I guess we'll build on. I needed a job after college. I'm an immigrant. I came to the U.S. To go to university, and then I wanted to stay. And I trained as an artist, as a sculptor. And so the only really jobs available were like working at a gallery or teaching, which I had done before and I had done throughout college. So I really wanted to get into teaching. And as an immigrant, it was easier to get a job at a private school. That's sort of the gist of it, and much more support. And I mean, something that I would say is true about independent schools. There's enormous support for the arts, and in some ways I alluded to that earlier, and also Dwight is referring to that they're independent. Like you have so much autonomy as a teacher because you have you don't have state mandates. Like it's literally where the independent school comes from. Like we're independent of each other and independent of the state. Obviously, we're accredited, and we grant diplomas not just because we want to, but that independence for me was important as an art teacher, and that was how I started my journey in a boarding school, which is it's a really different kind of independent school teaching than at a day school. There's lots of rewards in terms of you get to know the students really, really deeply and in different ways than where you don't coach them or guide them in the evenings in study hall and are there with them over the weekends, and like you see so many other aspects of a student's journey, which can be really rewarding as a teacher, as an educator. And then I came to a day school, a Quaker school in the city. And I became chair of the art department, which is another, I think, aspect that I would highlight from my journey is that I was given opportunities to grow really early on, really young. And I became chair of a department really early, which sort of gave me a window into school administration, and often school administrators also teach, which is somewhat unique, I guess, to independent schools, or I'm not sure how much that happens in public schools, but it's very common. Like right now, I'm a senior administrator and I also teach. And all of the senior administrators I work with also teach at least one class just to stay connected to the classroom. And then I've been doing equity work and sort of transitioned, which was something that I credit the independence and the autonomy that I was able to sort of expand professionally in that way, away from primarily teaching to primarily being an administrator or doing equity work. And I'm now in my 5th year of doing that. So that's been sort of my journey. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for sharing. So I am born and raised in New York City. I'm a Queens boy, and I fell in love with the idea of teaching in college. So I graduated, and my professional journey started teaching in a preschool in downtown Manhattan, and I did that for some years. Then I transitioned to an elementary school, part of a charter network out in Bushwick, Brooklyn, and I absolutely loved it. I was teaching kindergarten there as well. And I love the students, I love the parents, and I love coming in every day. It was an extremely demanding job, but I loved it, every part of it. My partner at the time, who's now my wife, was working at an independent school, and she kept nudging me every year to keep to update my resume, and go out to this job fair that she always mentioned, is this job fair itself. I told her that I would, but I never got around to it because I was happy where I was in the community that I was serving. But after about 3 years of her gentle suggestions, I updated my resume and made it to the diversity fair. And I was just blown away by the amount of opportunities that were out there, and also the interest that schools were having in me. So I just was lucky enough to find myself at the Allen Stevenson School. I got hired as an associate teacher. I did that for about 5 years, and then I was promoted to head teacher, teaching at the same school, kindergarten as well. So, and just a side note, I had no idea what an independent school was, being from New York City, until about 11 years ago when my wife introduced me to the idea of it. So that's just something to note as well. Like I was fresh into it, not knowing anything about independent schools altogether. So, and I've had a great experience so far, and I'm just excited to share more about my experience at an independent school.
Thanks, Jesse. Rebecca, how about you?
So I started out my career in higher education, and I did the whole track, and wanted to end up being a professor. Did 3 years of teaching in a research university, and hit a point at which I was just dissatisfied and decided I needed to do something else. And I thought I was going to open a restaurant, so I went and I worked the line at a kitchen for a few years, and worked the front of the house for a few years. I was about 5-6 years out of education, and just realized I missed teaching, and also was a little overwhelmed with what I was doing. The sort of culture of restaurants at that time was fast paced and drinking rich, and I felt like I wasn't really in a place where I was, getting the kind of health in my life that I needed. So I went into a job interview at an independent school just to see. I wasn't sure if I wanted to do that or not. And almost immediately felt like this was home. Like things had been, too intellectual and lonely in higher ed. They'd been overly social and what's the opposite of lonely? Yeah, just overly social in restaurants. And I felt like this was just right. And most importantly, I felt like Javal, you were saying, a sense of there was a lot of desire to grow me quickly, and that's true for anybody who enters intermediate school. That if you're interested, there are growth opportunities left and right. I got immediately involved with the diversity work at that point. I was in a small high school in the Pacific Northwest at that point, and was really interested in diversifying the school itself, and that's how I got into it. And then started to realize there was a whole network of independent schools where people were talking to each other and having really, really important conversations about the culture of these places. And worked then at a high school in San Francisco for about 11 years as a department chair of the history department, and then came to Spence as the equity director. The whole time I was doing the history work, really thinking about what's the state of our schools and how are we supporting our communities and supporting change in the culture of our schools. Because as much as I love the dynamism of the kids and the really free reign given to teachers and the support and the professional support for teachers, one thing that was always challenging for me was some of what had been white historical norms in these schools, and the traditions of a certain kind of culture. And so the opportunity to work in a position that was specifically focused on that element of independent schools felt like an exciting chance. So I moved across the country, came to New York to work at Spence. And there's a lot more I could say about that, but I'm sure we'll get to it in the rest of our questions. So I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you, everybody. The next question that I would love for you all to speak about is, what have been some of your professional highlights so far? So Jesse, I'm going to ask you to go first. Yuval, I'll ask you to go second. Rebecca third, and Dwight fourth. And just think about, what professional highlights have come up for you that you would like to highlight? And you already know that the next question after that is, if we've had highlights, we've also had some challenges. So just letting you know.
Of course. With ups, there's downs, right? And downs and then back up. So for me personally, some professional highlights that I've had so far working at an independent school, I think the one that just is on top for me is having an opportunity to facilitate an affinity group at our school. It's an affinity group for boys who identify as people of color. We have a cute little acronym called BOCUS, so Boys of Color at Allen Stevenson. And it's just been an opportunity for me to really get into a room with a group of boys that look like me and really talk about issues that they have about being at a predominantly white school, right? So, and that's not always the easiest to do with, you know, your homeroom teacher or wherever it may be. So it felt like a really safe place. And for me, it's just such a rejuvenating and energizing opportunity for me to really have with the boys and just talk to them and just on many levels, just keeping it real with each other, right? So, and a lot of our boys in our school don't have that opportunity all the time. So I just feel proud and, you know, enthusiastic to give that opportunity for them. So another professional highlight, I think, is having an opportunity to attend the People of Color Conference. And for those of you who don't know, every year, NYSAIS hosts a whole group of people, depending on where we go. And it's just an opportunity to really connect with people, not just within our network, but outside our network at different schools and different states, and sometimes even different countries. So that's just really a highlight for me. And I think being promoted to a head teacher, I think really was a highlight for me. I was hired an associate, you know, did my time, and was just able to find the position that I wanted, and it was at my same school. So I'm just lucky and fortunate that my school valued me and wanted to keep me, because I really wanted that head teacher position, and they gave it to me. So those are just a few highlights for me.
Jesse, I would like to say that they didn't just give it to you. I would argue you earned it.
Thank you. Yes.
And I also just want to do a point of clarification before our next panelist responds. The People of Color Conference is sponsored by the National Association of Independent Schools, or NAIS.
Sorry.
NYSAIS, our state association, sponsors a diversity conference held each spring, which is a day-long conference versus the People of Color Conference, which is a professional development opportunity over multiple days. So I just wanted to clarify for folks. No problem. Who's up next?
I think I am. I could talk about accomplishments, and there have been some. I think what I want to highlight is the community, the network, the people that I have met over the years that have been that have become really family. Especially, I don't have any relatives who live in this country. Like the professional community that then has translated. I think it's a highlight for me in that it's really deep. It has helped me navigate in some ways what it's like to be a person of color at a primarily white institution or institutions that I've been in, and I think that's the most helpful thing I could say, because I could list sort of accomplishments, which I'm proud of course, and there have been lots of opportunities to affect change, which I think is what I am interested in. Obviously, I wouldn't have taken a director of diversity position if I weren't interested in making change, and there have been lots of moments like that that have been really meaningful to me. But I think they go hand in hand. I think the community that I have found. And it's obviously people within the schools that I've worked in, but also other schools, which is sort of partly through NYSAIS and other networks that exist. You do get to connect with people from all over the country and other schools in the city, and make work on projects together, work on professional development opportunities, either as a participant, but also as a presenter. Like there's little opportunities like that I've been able to then develop a network that is very meaningful to me. And just thinking about like the 19 years of my career, like that's really, those are the highlights. Like the friendships you make through this community are really, really strong.
Beautiful. Um, I want to second the two highlights that I just heard. Jesse, your highlight about the People of Color Conference, for me, that's always been a highlight, and that's connected to Javal, your highlight about the community. For me, those are huge highlights. Having an extended community, and at this point, um, uh, the ability to know people nationally who are doing work in schools so that you can really make sense of what these places are about and what the opportunities are, and to work on projects. I think the thing that I would highlight in addition to that is the kids. I've had so many moments as a teacher, and as an administrator of being with kids, where I just was blown away by their hunger to learn, their energy, and I think that would be true probably for me in most schools. But the difference in independent schools for me is the sort of free reign you have to create um, a structure for them, in a way that can work for the individual kids who are coming to you with some particular excitements or particular interests. The independence of our schools allow us to do a lot, and encourage us to do a lot with those passions and energies, and to really create space for them. So I think for me, the kids are what keep the excitement, because they're so dynamic, and honestly they're well resourced children, and I don't mean they necessarily come from well resourced backgrounds, but they come into a space where all their teachers believe in them and have the energy and bandwidth to know them more than in many of my public school colleagues. Have that, but at a great cost, and maybe not for every child. And so there is a lot of attention given to these kids, and you can see them thriving because of it. And so it's a really great environment to work with.
Thank you.
All right. It's hard to follow up. I mean, everyone listed such amazing parts of our jobs and our experiences as people of color in independent schools. I want to kind of like highlight a few for me, and it starts with Liz. I know my first year as an independent school teacher, I worked with Liz to kind of like help create the Hilltop Diversity Conference for middle school students. And that for me was a highlight because it allowed me an opportunity, one, to work with someone who's amazing like Liz, but two, it gave me the understanding that like the things in my head and the dreams that I have are achievable. And just having that opportunity just to real life a dream was so important to me. And then that allowed me to then create the Young Men of Color Symposium, which is a conference for boys in age in grades 6 through 12 throughout New York City and beyond, to create like a day-long leadership conference. And that wouldn't have been possible if I didn't have the opportunity to partner with Liz my first year, to kind of like create that. So Liz, thank you so much. Definitely a highlight, professional highlight for me. Another highlight for me is the opportunity to help cultivate leaders, right? You know, in many ways, I try to pay forward the good stuff that I've been blessed to receive. So one of the things that really stood out to me a few years ago, while I was at Riverdale, is that we had a few first year teachers who came to me and were like, hey, can we do something for Black History Month? Like, we would love to kind of like put together a few different events. What does that look like? And I was like, you tell me and let's make it happen. And we worked together and we partnered together. And it created this kind of like, almost like tumbling effect of kids, of adults in the community really excited about Heritage Months in ways that we hadn't been before. And all of the people who were involved in that cultivation of that month, that creation of that month, have since gone on to do amazing things at other institutions. And it has been great to kind of like just be a part of that. So I start off with one where I was kind of like, wow, look at what's possible. And then I have progressed in my role now to kind of like help others kind of like real life their dream. And that's one of the most amazing things about being in independent schools is that you do have a certain kind of freedom that you may not receive in other institutions. And it's about how you utilize that freedom and, the partnerships that you develop. There's a lot of collaborative opportunities that exist, and it's about, how can you make those work for you? And if you have an idea, it's possible. It's more than possible. It's doable. It's achievable. So I just hope that as you think about making this transition to independent schools, that you keep that in mind as well. So those classes that you wanted to teach, like, teach them. It's more than possible.
Thank you, Dwight. That was really kind of you. I am super curious for you to reflect on what have been some of the challenges. And when I frame this as challenges in these schools, you can speak to a professional challenge. You can speak to a challenging moment that's happened in the city, in our country. You can sort of go in any direction. And I just invite anyone to start, and then I'll tee you up after. But really, what have been some of your challenges, either professional challenges or challenges in the moment, and how have you experienced them at school? Who'd like to go first? Yuval.
I think I'm going to generalize at first and then I give some examples. I think moments of crises are challenging regardless of the role that you're in. So either a financial crises, and independent schools are often tuition driven. So if there's a financial crisis that affects the budgets of schools, which means, this is true in public schools and other institutions, obviously, but those are moments where you get to see a lot of the cracks that exist get amplified in moments of crises. So that's challenging, and obviously it depends on how it affects you, depending on the position you have. I think the most recent one was the 2016 election. I was brand new to the position that I was coming into the school. The position was new to the school, and 3 months later, from the year starting, that happened, and it was, so many people were not expecting it. It was a challenging moment that then redefined this is sort of obvious, the following years, but the equity work keeps sort of getting shifted because the national events keep shifting equity work within independent schools based on what happens outside. Obviously, the summer, and sometimes for the better, especially this summer, it accelerates the work, but the work changes and it becomes really different, and you have to adjust your expectations and you have to adjust quickly what you thought you were going to be able to do. And sometimes they become opportunities and doors open because of challenging moments. I think that some of the hardest moments have been sort of, I would say there are moments where the whiteness of the institutions does impact interpersonal relationships, and that has been challenging, but the support network is really helpful in those situations, and as schools get better at navigating those situations, that has also improved. And now I'm sort of in the role of helping that happen, so I'm on a different wavelength with that. I'll stop there.
I can piggyback off that. I think one of the things that makes those crises particularly challenging is something we spoke about earlier, which is this wonderful ability to do a lot of different things and to shift a lot of different things. Is also how it's curtailed is by being a client services, because it's an independent school that is really driven by tuition and is I'm thinking for instance of some of our gender diversity work in a girls' school, and how that was a lot about bringing the community on board, whereas public schools were able to move directly to the child's stated gender, and that was law, and there wasn't a need to sort of massage your way into convincing people that something needed to happen. So I think that's not crisis, but it's a matter of change in these independent schools can sometimes be slow, and because of the nature of how they work. They work based on families who have committed their money. In the case of the school I'm in now, they committed that 12 years ago often by the time they're still in the school. And so they expect the school to be a certain way. And if the school recognizes through any sort of either crisis moment or otherwise any learning moment that change needs to happen, it can't always happen as swiftly as you would like it and as smoothly as you would like it. So that's one challenge. I think the other significant challenge for me is in independent. It's been true for a long time, and I went to independent schools. I went to 3 years of a boarding school in Boston when I was in high school, and I still find them very difficult to interpret sometimes, the rules. And so while you can do anything and you can make anything happen, it isn't always clear how you get the mentorship unless you ask a whole bunch of people and you find out. It isn't always when you have those networks. It isn't always clear what the rules or the culture of the school are exactly because people are interpreting the mission. So you got to try to figure that out on the ground. There are stated things about what they value, and then there are unstated things about what we value. And I think that includes the kind of pedagogy that is in the school, the kind of expectations for how long you work in a given day, the kind of how much prep you do for any given class. There are expectations around all of that that are unstated. And I think, and that can be really, really difficult to interpret. And it can be particularly difficult if you are not of independent schools, if your background is not of independent schools. Like I said, I even went to an independent school and find it really, really challenging because I don't know New York independent schools. So I don't know how these places work per se. And so there's lots of unstated rules, which is why building those networks and staying in touch, knowing that you are meeting a panel of people you can reach out to and say, hey, can you explain to me how this works? That kind of thing is really an important part of traversing these schools.
Yeah.
Thanks, Rebecca. Dwight?
Yeah, just kind of like continue what folks have said. I think one of the greatest challenges that I've experienced professionally is how to help my community, my students, my families, alums, right? How to help them make sense of the world around them, especially as the world around us is continually changing. I mean, this summer, wow, right? Like we come back into schools and we are oftentimes tasked with helping people make sense of that. The other thing that is connected to that is really helping folks understand that equity work is excellence, right? All of our schools are committed to academic rigor and, giving our students the best kind of education that's possible. And one of the things that I oftentimes try to remind people is that if we are talking about Black students or if we're talking about people of color, that doesn't mean that we're trying to change our academic expectations. That doesn't mean that we are somehow lowering our bar of excellence, right? But actually, by paying attention to our most vulnerable or our most marginalized people, we're actually raising the bar, right? By figuring out what we need to do to make sure that all people are experiencing and having that equitable experience. And then that is connected to the sense of belonging. I think it's really hard. Val talked a little bit about this, the whiteness of our spaces can be really daunting, overpowering in many ways, right? So that can affect a child's, a teacher's, an administrator's sense of belonging, right? Like, do I belong in these spaces? And I think that that's part of the challenge of the work that that I'm deeply invested in, and others on this call are as well, is like, how do we help our students, and not just our Black and brown students, right? But our queer identified student, our trans students, our students of less economic affluence, our students who are not Christian, or, you know, who might be Muslim, or who might be immigrants, right? Like there's so many different identities in which that sense of belonging can be challenged. And, you know, that's the work that I'm deeply invested in. And I know that people on this call are deeply invested in, is like, how do we make sure that all of our students can feel like my school is my school, right? And it's not like I'm just going there. You know, when I was a student there, back in the late 90s, mid to late 90s, the whole idea was you go to the school, it's almost like a prison term, you do your time, you get out, and you just never look back. But how do we actually shift that, right? How do we make it so that people love their time there, enjoy their time there, want to reconnect with the many people who are there, right? And that's part of the challenge in doing this work.
Thanks, Dwight. Jesse, do you have anything to add?
I mean, there was a lot of, I have to piggyback off a few of our panelists, but just honestly for me and in general, what adjusting to the independent school setting was a big challenge for me. Knowing who to trust, who I can build authentic relationship with, and that took a while for it to happen, only because obviously I'm a Latino male and not many people look like me in my school. So that was really the hardest part for me transitioning into independent school. So, and I think the biggest takeaway that I got from everything was just participating in the affinity groups and the professional development work, and just broadening myself and having that opportunity to find myself and find community, I think was the biggest part for me going in. So, but yeah.
Thank you, Jesse. And I'm going to transition to our final question before I open it up to any attendee questions. And so our final question is, in 1 or 2 sentences, what advice would you offer candidates of color who are pursuing, who are considering and pursuing independent schools? And I want to frame this from the following perspective, because there are 5 different schools currently represented, the 4 panelists in my own school. I'm the assistant head of school at the Ethical Culture Fieldston School. We all are in person, high flex, remote. Hiring looks a little bit different. Some of our schools will do all hiring virtually. Some may try to do something in person. All of that has changed, and part of the game is to really be flexible and to understand that, it's not ideal. It's what we have so that we can get through this moment in our lives and prioritize everyone's individual and collective health and safety, obviously. So when you think about offering advice to candidates of color, knowing this is going to be a virtual job fair, knowing that we may not know how many positions we have available when we traditionally do, because things will change in people's lives and there needs to be a certain flexibility, in the moment. Where would you go? And so I'm going to ask Jesse to speak first, then Yuval, Dwight, and end with Rebecca. And feel free, if what you were going to say has already been said, feel free to just pass to the next person.
Yeah, sure. I mean, after my first year teaching at an independent school, I quickly realized that all children need good teachers, right? It doesn't matter where you live, where you come from, no matter that, none of that really matters. Children everywhere need good teachers. So when it comes to independent schools, the opportunity is definitely there. And I would, if you're passionate about teaching, I would definitely for sure look into it. And I would listen to every email that Liz sends out. That was super helpful for me. Being at these kind of discussions and being at the pre-talks and just the building up to the job fair really, really was valuable for me. And I just say, go for it and try it as hard as you can.
Thanks, Jesse.
I'll be concise. If I were in the middle of a search right now, I would ask questions about how the community has fared around the pandemic. Like, what cracks have shown as part of this crisis, and how has the school been able to sort of hold the community together in the middle of all of this? Especially because we don't know what the fall exactly will look like. I would ask questions around that. And you learn a lot about what the school values, like through how people answer, or like the kinds of things people say, or they'll refer back to the plans they had and then how they had to change them. Things like that I think would be helpful to get a sense of what a school is like.
Dwight?
Yeah, my suggestion to you all is to keep in mind that you are the prize, right? As Toni Morrison writes, you are your best thing, and know that as you are looking for schools and schools are looking for you, right? So keep that in mind. You are the prize, and ask those questions, really just figure out, like, is this a place that I can see myself? Can I continue to grow? What are growth opportunities like here, right? Those are some of the questions that I would make sure that you ask.
Thank you. Rebecca?
I think this dovetails from the rest of our conversation. One of the most important things you can do in any job search, I think, during the pandemic, it's going to be even more important that you're able to do this, is show interest in the school by asking questions, being curious. I think do your homework going into any of the schools you really want. Make sure you know what the mission is. Make sure, not just by so that you're reciting it constantly, but make sure that you've read up on the school's website and can show that know something about the place. Then the other thing that I would say is just underscoring what Dwight you just said. I think asking questions and showing that real curiosity about the place, demonstrates to folks that you're the kind of person who will come into the community and want to build those relationships and want to take advantage of those opportunities and build projects and connections with kids and be parts of affinity groups and all of that. And so I think that'll be important. And then I think the other thing is when it's not a good fit, there's a lot of schools out there. That's the last piece of advice. So when it feels wrong, probably it wouldn't be a great place to work. And it's not you. It's the school, and it's a bad. If it feels bad, it probably wouldn't be a great place to work. So just remember that all the way through.
Thank you. Thank you, panelists. And now participants, those of you that are lucky enough to be live, this is your opportunity to ask questions. You can ask the question in a chat, and I will speak the question so that everyone can hear. I can also invite you to come on camera or just unmute yourself and ask your question. If you would like to ask a question of a panelist specifically, please remember we have Yuval, Rebecca, Jesse, and Dwight. So this is your time. Go ahead, Camille.
Hi, everyone. Well, thank you for this tonight. I'm actually really learning a lot because I come from public schools. Like, I went to public school my entire life, and I worked through a community-based organization as a college advisor in a school in Queens. So Queens. But I do have a question on, I was always concerned about opportunities for growth within a school setting. And y'all have been in your positions for so long, and y'all have grown. How have you been able to provide, I guess, mentorship to young people, like people that are very relatively new in this field? Have you been able to provide that for people like me, I guess, coming in to this? And anyone can answer.
Okay, which one of you wants to take that one?
Well, I can start and just say that we have you're immediately given a mentor at Spence when you come in. So as all new faculty and staff are given a mentor that is you're matched with. And I think really taking advantage of that mentor and the most important thing would be, again, that initiative to say you want that kind of growth. I think it's almost always there if you ask. That's the amazing thing about these places. And the difficult thing about these places is that you have to ask. It won't necessarily, there's not a clear pathway necessarily to growth to another position. But there are people all over the school. I know all over my school who, if you say anything about what you're interested in, they'll help you find a way to make that part of your job. That's what I would recommend.
Yeah, I would suggest just making connections with people. I think the more that you can share who you are, because you're more than just a teacher, right? And I think it's really important for us to kind of like understand that we bring our full selves, or we should be able to bring our full selves into our work environments. So, so if you're really into, whatever it is, let them know that a kid might be really excited about that, and they may want you to help start a club, and then boom, look at you, you already added another hat, to your teaching role. I think the more that you can communicate with people and make those connections, I think those opportunities present themselves. And don't feel, I would suggest also like asking to help, right? Like if you know that someone's working on something, hey, can I give you an extra hand on that? And in the process of doing, I mean, look, that's what teaching is, right? Like you want kids to do, right? And sometimes when you're in the process of doing, you also get a chance to learn, and what you learn in that experience, right? You can then hopefully translate it back into your classroom, or possibly into another opportunity.
Yeah.
Thank you. So one thing I would say to those of you listening is what you've heard is that there are perhaps formal mentoring program opportunities and pairings that happen in schools, and many more informal opportunities that happen with different colleagues and professionals. So perhaps one suggestion as a takeaway is to maybe just ask, what are the mentoring opportunities that exist at your school? The formal ones that might create pairings and sort of automatic connections. And for those of you pursuing associate or assistant teaching positions, some of that mentoring is meant to be with the head teacher that you work with, or perhaps the assistant principal of a particular division. So it may not necessarily be stated explicitly. It's there.
Yeah.
Other questions that we have that you might have? Okay. So I want to thank Yuval, Rebecca, Jesse, and Dwight this evening. I want to thank those of you that joined us live, those of you that are viewing this. We are hosting these informational webinars that are based on different themes to be able to support all of the prospective candidates that are interested in seeking employment within the independent schools that will be attending the NYSAIS job fair to promote diversity. Once again, that's virtually on Saturday, February 20th, 2021, between 10 and 2 p.m. We encourage everyone to please register for that event. Registration is absolutely easy and free. Please make sure that your resumes are ready in PDF format, ready to be shared. And I just want to conclude with, please look at the school websites, take a look at what positions people have available between now and long after the job fair. It's critically important since there's so much movement, because there's so much uncertainty. As you look at the school websites, pay close attention to how you apply for a particular position, and please follow the guidelines. That is really important. Also, visit to learn more about our schools, the NYSAIS website, NYSAIS, once again, NYSAIS.org. You can always email me at jobfair@nysais.org for any questions or any way that I might be able to support you. And I want to conclude thanking my friends and the panelists to recognize that we have many colleagues of color who have successfully navigated independent schools. They are, for all intents and purposes, with very few exceptions, predominantly white spaces or white identifying spaces. There is work to be done everywhere. And I encourage you all to think about what it might mean to join our schools to create the kinds of opportunities, whether they be teaching opportunities or administrative opportunities, where we can demonstrate just an ability to collaborate with one another and to successfully support the teaching and learning experience of the young people that are entrusted to us, and partner with our colleagues to create extraordinary learning spaces. So I invite you all to consider, to allow us to support you in the process, and we're grateful that you were able to join us this evening. Andrew, my colleague at NYSAIS, I want to thank you for the behind the scenes work, everyone who joined us and viewed. And of course, once again, thank you to my panelists for contributing and sharing your stories on this particular webinar this evening. Have a great evening. Everybody stay safe, healthy, and hopeful.